Okay. It's great to be here, and I'm thrilled to be back at CAMOC. Rainey Tisdale and I presented last year in Milan, and Rainey sends her best wishes to all of you. I'm from the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience, and the good news, well, there's two pieces of good news. I have snacks. Okay. I'll just be loud. Okay. Yes. I hate being at mine, but I will. Okay? Okay. Okay. So, I'm from the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience, and I'm going to tell you 5 quick things about the coalition, because you'll get a chance later in the week to hear a little more about what we do from some of our members. So, 5 really quick things about the coalition. We're a global network of 240 sites and growing in 55 countries around the world who believe, excuse me, that museums, memory organizations, and historic sites can turn memory into action. We think about sites, even though it's in our name, in a broad way. So our members include Maison d'Esclaves, the House of Slaves, the first World Heritage Site in Africa, the Red Star Line Museum in Antwerp, Act for the Disappeared in Lebanon, a civil society organization working to document the disappeared in Lebanon. So we have a broad reach. We work kind of in 2 ways, I think. We work on big societal change. We think about democracy building. We think about accountability for human rights abuses. That's part of the work we do. Thank you. But we also work in kind of a personal way, right? Which is to say, how are changes made for individuals? How do we support individuals? How do we think differently? How do we encourage other people to think differently? And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today. And the last thing, important thing about the coalition, is we think of ourselves as a continuously learning organization. That includes the 14 of us at the Secretariat in New York, but all of our members. We are continually looking for opportunities to learn from each other. We develop toolkits. I'm super stealing ideas from those videos. We're really interested in finding out ways to learn from our colleagues around the world, both members and others. So that's incredibly quickly what the coalition does. But change, as I said, is personal. And so you all have done a lot of listening today. You've been really good listeners, but you're going to stop being listeners now. I want you to take out a piece of paper, any kind of paper, because honestly, there is no paper within like 6 blocks of this museum, I discovered, because I went and looked. I know, I was like, oh, people will have paper. Okay. So that you don't have to do anything fancy with the paper. You could even draw on the back of the hip-hop lyrics that Anne-Marie distributed if you want. And I have to say, this little exercise is inspired by Anne-Marie's Facebook page. I have to own up that that's where the idea for this came from. When I look at Anne-Marie's Facebook page, she is somewhere different every week. Oh, she's in a leather bar. Oh, she's in a refugee's apartment. Oh, she's at a contemporary art thing. She's everywhere. She is, she totally is. But I think for all of us, and that includes me, we're not quite as good as we might be about getting outside of our comfort zones, right? So I want you, on that piece of paper, to take just a couple minutes and draw a map of like a day in your life. It could be a weekday, or a weekend, about where you go in your city. Just take a couple minutes and draw a map that is about your places in a day. Regular day. Either a weekend or a work day. You can choose either one. Okay, now I want you to turn to someone next to you, or find someone next to you, and I want you to share the map, but I also want you to talk with each other about the places you don't go to in your city. Could be really on your block, right? There might be certain places you don't go. Could be anywhere in the city. I want you to look at the map together, each of your maps together, but then I want you to talk together about the places that aren't on your map, but that are in your city, that you don't go for whatever reason. Well, no, because then we would pick a couple places that you don't. It could be both. That's a great question. So could be a specific place, a restaurant, a place of worship, or it could be a neighborhood, but think about the places that you don't go to. And just talk to each other, find a partner. You can be 3. You guys, good job. You can be 3. You might want to jot them down and talk about them, but talking is most important. Okay, I want to hear, if I can, I know I can tell you guys have been dying to talk all day. I want to hear from somebody about what they learned from someone else. So I don't want to hear about where you don't go. I want to hear about what you learned from somebody else. Who wants to volunteer? Anne-Marie. Yeah, great. Who else wants to share where they learned? Yeah. Okay, who else has somewhere they learned about? You guys were talking up a storm. You're all Canadians. I don't know if you're many Canadians together. Right, you stick to where you live. Yeah, and where it's comfortable, right? So how about, what did you guys learn about each other?
But we learned that, well, it's not totally new, it's really known each other, but we lack both the same type of places we are not going in on.
Ah, and what are those places?
Parks, forests, seaside, going out enough, and also concerts, theater, and cinema.
How many of you go on any kind of regular basis to a house of worship that's not your own? Your own religion, something different. Or even at all, right? So you go regularly. You don't go every week, but, right? But right, as we know, it's hard to go into a house of worship you're not familiar with. Yeah. Yes, that's Anne-Marie, and that is why Anne-Marie's Facebook page is always full. Okay, in the way back.
Just to stress, because you let all of us, but no one, because we think that after all, worship should be put in a very much lower position.
Wait, say, sorry, louder for me.
Said, if you go to other houses of worship of a religion which is not yours, what a problem if you don't have any religion, which is the minority position in any city.
Yeah. And then, but there are, right, lots of people in cities.
You don't have to be religious to go into a house of worship. Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Whatever, even if it's yours or not yours, but go to a house of worship.
Yeah, so, yeah, the question was, do you go, right? Houses of worship, I think, are really intimidating, right? Not big tourists, not Sophia, right? A million people, not the Vatican, but houses of worship that people really use as worship places, I think are really intimidating to many. That requires you to go outside your comfort zone, right? And so that's part of what I'm talking about. Is like is it Nicole from the Rotterdam Museum, is that her name? The idea that she went and had lunch with Bulgarian construction workers, that's amazing, right? And that's part of what I mean, right? Is that you go to really do the work of city museums now, particularly around migration, means that you have to go to all these places you never ever thought you would go to. And I mean, for myself, I remember lots of times being like, I don't know, is this like, right? And you just, right, part of the process is making up your mind to do it. So for people who do it, I see a lot of head nodding. What makes you do it? Anne-Marie, why do you go? Is it curiosity?
No, it's not curiosity, it's also because I make a lot of exhibitions about these subjects. So if I make an exhibition about people, there's no way I can make an exhibition without actually going to the stadium and not just go.
Yeah, not just go once, but have, I mean, stadiums have all different places. It's like the VIP section, there's the family section, there's the hooligan section. And to really experience this, you have to have been in all these sections. So somehow my work sort of forces me to go to these places.
Right. Yeah.
I beg your pardon to insist. I think that, of course, if we are to go in touch with different collectivities, you have to go everywhere. You go to the houses, you go to the worship, you go to the cemeteries, to everywhere. The problem is that in a kind of, I don't know, trying to not feel guilty for being different or for being European, there is a kind of visits in which you say, oh, fantastic, that's your religion. And you are on the side of approving traditions. We should never go into approving any tradition, not yours, not ours either. The way in which the ethnographical and ethnological work is done many times is a kind of complicity, not of enhancing you to tell us how you are, but telling, after God, that's fantastic how you are. And then comes into contradiction when, for example, instead of what said this morning someone, many situations of women become much worse after migration than before because of that reactive behaviors linked to a vision of different worships. So we should be very careful in not showing any reject, of course, but either any, complicity. It's very dangerous to begin to show complicities because after all it's not true.
So one of the things, I wasn't going to talk about this, but maybe I'll just mention it kind of quickly. One of the things that the coalition kind of thinks about is in our work is the idea that there are 4 truths, right? Which comes from a number of truth and justice and reconciliation commissions, right? A first truth is an individual truth. Your lived truth, your lived truth, your lived truth, right? Then there's a forensic truth. Literally, what documentation, what, in a lot of our work, physical remains tell us, right? There's that truth. Then there's a societal truth, which is often at odds with each other, right? I mean, there was a point in Europe when there was a societal truth that it was okay to kill all the Jews, right? That was a societal truth. We don't believe that anymore, right? But so the fourth truth is really the truth about never again. Getting to the point through all those other truths where we can really think about how women are treated, think about how, Europeans and non-Europeans, or Americans and non-Americans treat each other. But it's a long journey to that fourth truth. And I think I teach a graduate museum studies course about community engagement. And one of my students wrote last week, I don't know what she'd been reading, she wrote, museums cannot be fair weather friends. And I thought that was so like a great comment. Because often, right, we go to these communities when we're like doing an exhibit and we want to like suck all the information out of them, and then we're done. And I think, some of the videos, you can see that that's not what's happening. And I think that's the really important shift. So one of the things I really thought about in Doug Sanders' kind of complicated chart today about all those like things migrants and refugees need to kind of settle into, become a part of a place, I think he's really missing one. And I think what he's missing is the emotional one, right? Totally, it was all like bureaucratic, right? It's kind of interesting, right? And I just thought, what anybody in any community needs is to feel kind of at home and safe and valued and to have that emotional center. And one of the things, we do a lot of truth and reconciliation work at the Coalition, working in places like Colombia, like Sri Lanka, like Afghanistan, and it's really about a process of healing. And I think museums could have really, really interesting roles to play in the context of thinking more about healing. So a couple examples, which I'm not going to show you, but I'd be happy to show you some other time. A couple things we've done. This summer, I got to go to Sri Lanka to observe a body mapping workshop. And basically, it's a process. I spent a week with 20 women aged 20 to 40 probably, from all sides of the conflict in Sri Lanka. And body mapping is a process by, you trace a life-size outline of yourself, and you map your life story around the outside of your body, and then on your body, literally, you map the physical and emotional marks that it's left on you. It's incredibly powerful. And part of what was interesting to me as a museum person, they are also works of art. They are really beautiful. And it's just women, these were all kinds of women from, one was a dressmaker and one was a student and one worked for an NGO, right? But they'd all been affected by the war, and they produced these incredible works of art. And I think to think about, to kind of take this step a little bit beyond, documenting refugees or migrants or new populations in your community, or even old populations, and to kind of think about, what is it they can make and do? The body mapping was incredible. Another one of the ones that our an Afghan member of the Coalition and an Algerian member of the Coalition have done are make memory boxes about people who are disappeared. Right? And it's quite interesting because culturally, and I forget where else, another country was totally like, those look like coffins to us. We are not doing it. So part of it, right, is always figuring out what's right. But these are kind of incredible boxes in which they're really tributes to people who are disappeared. I don't know if any of you in Europe had a chance to see the refugee exhibit at I'm going to try and get the name right, the Museum of European Cultures in Berlin. that was the most incredible exhibit I'd ever seen. They worked, because I thought, oh, Museum of European Cultures seems like, I don't know what I expected. Something really kind of uptight and sorry, and the museum gave over like 3 large gallery spaces to all the inhabitants of a hostel where refugees had first come. And they worked together people from all different places, from Afghanistan, from Syria, and created these kind of, using the bed frames from the hostel and drawings and everything else, these kind of incredible installations about the experience of being a refugee. Really works of art. And then the tour you took was called a tandem tour. So a curator from the museum joined one of the refugee artists, and you took a tour with them together, right? And that kind of, really deep, kind of amazing engagement really makes a difference. So I think thinking about how art, however we want to think about art in a definitional way, that is a process, is a step towards healing, and a real step towards understanding, right? I'll remember for a long time what it was like to spend a week with those women in Sri Lanka, and to hear their, women my own daughter's age, and to hear their stories of their disappeared husbands, and their 20 refugee camps, 20 displacement camps in 2 years. And that it takes this expression, a really important expression. I don't actually suggest this is work that you tomorrow go home and do, right? I think it's work that takes time and cultivation. I think it probably really takes working with those women in that last panel who really have skills about working with communities that are different than our skills as museum people. But I think those are things we all can do. So I've got one other thing for you to do. I've got 2 other things. This is the next one. Take out another piece of paper or flip over the same one. Everybody still got paper? Okay. Now, I want you to trace your hand. I don't have enough paper to do full body maps for all of you. I want you to trace your hand and begin to map your own story. You can write it around your hand. You can map things on your hand that represent something. Just begin to think about your own life story and how your hand represents it. Got it? I'll be honest, there's no wrong things here, so just try. It is, I have to say, I didn't think I could do a full body mapping exercise with all of you. So the body mapping workshops we run are 5 full days of thinking about yourself. And I have to say, it's really, and the way it works, just kind of in the workshop sense, if you're interested, is that, you start with one section of your life right before you went to school. People write in a journal. Then they share it out loud, and then they draw it on drawn right on the big body map. And it's pretty intense, right? It's really intense. These women have been through, things you can hardly imagine. And it is both, one of the things that happened in the Sri Lankan group is that it was people from, there was a woman whose husband had been in the army and was killed. And there were Tamil Tiger activists from totally the other side. And what they realized was that they were in the same boat. And particularly as women, they were in the same boat. They'd suffered loss. They were supporting often supporting quite extended families. And so it's a really, I think any of these processes, there's another process I've read about, I haven't seen used, called a tree of life. It's another kind of exercise, and I'm happy to send links about all this to everybody if you're interested. And a tree of life, you start and you draw, the roots are like your family and your origins, and then you go up through your life, and then you end up with your hopes. And I think all of these are just a process of, You know, one of the things that I think is interesting about most of us as museum people, we like words, right? We like to talk to people, we like to read things, that's kind of who we are. And particularly when you're dealing with people whose native language is not the language of the place where you are. You know, their native language is not Portuguese, it's not Dutch. That using some of these art techniques, I think really begin to open up some really interesting stories in the world. Kind of incredible. And I'll be honest, I've worked at the Coalition since February, and I think the process, it also becomes transformative for you. And I think that's the really important part, is that, you know, much of this work is about empathy, is about museums not necessarily being neutral, is about museums really thinking about how to turn memory into action. So all those things, I think we can begin to work on in all kinds of different ways. One of the things I've really learned from my time at the Coalition is that I knew the Coalition mostly from its US sites. And the US sites and many of our European sites are museums who've moved towards social justice work. You know, the Amsterdam Museum and the Rotterdam Museum were one kind of museum. Now they're kind of a different kind of museum, right? They've moved. In the other parts of the world that our members are from, it's actually social justice and human rights actors who see that museums and archives are incredibly powerful tools. They think we're really powerful in terms of telling stories and making change. And that shift to really understanding that kind of deep, deep power that human rights actors believe that museums can do, it's totally has been inspiring for me. I hope it is for all of you. So 2 more quick things, and then rumor has it, the parade, the invented tradition of the Day of the Dead parade ends at Zocalo at 5:30, so we'll finish in time. So 2 things. One, of course I have information about the Coalition, where I'd love to talk to any of you who are interested in becoming a member. But the second thing, everybody gets a Post-it note, and I'm going to ask you to write down a resolution about something you're going to do different based on what you learned today. Right? You're going to do something different. It might be you're going to try body mapping. It might be you're going to send Marlene her 5-minute video. It might be you're going to go have lunch with Bulgarian construction workers. Or you're going to work with a different kind of NGO. But I want everybody to write down a resolution in whatever language you want, and I want you to just stick them by the door when you go out. You will see them again in some form. I will tell you. I will not tell you how you will see them again, but you will see them again. And now, any questions? I'll give these